Welcome to Beyond the Ridge, Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center's web series, bringing you interesting stories and interpretations of race, religion, medicine, and war from the 19th century and beyond. My name is Cody Aish, and I serve as Operations Manager at Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center. Today I'm standing on East Cemetery Hill, about 1 mile or so southeast of the Lutheran Seminary and the museum building on the western side of the town of Gettysburg. And I'm standing directly across the street from the Baltimore Street entrance of Soldiers National Cemetery, dedicated about 4.5 months after the battle and the eventual burial place for 3,500 United States soldiers killed or mortally wounded at the Battle of Gettysburg, and thousands of service members for the United States who've died in service of their country since the American Civil War. Today we're going to be talking about an event that we all commemorate nationally annually, a tradition originally known as Decoration Day, today known as Memorial Day, and each year commemorated on the final Monday of the month of May. There are many origins or suggested origins for that tradition known as Memorial Day. They range all the way from Southern women decorating Confederate soldiers' graves in the South to formerly enslaved African Americans holding a parade and festivities and a picnic at a United States prisoner of war camp in Charleston, South Carolina, mere days after that city was evacuated in the spring of 1865 at the end of the Civil War. But the first real official Decoration Day, today Memorial Day, that is commemorated, takes place in May 1868, 5 years after the Battle of Gettysburg and 3 years after the conclusion of the American Civil War. We're going to discuss that event, Decoration Day, the first national event, how it was commemorated here at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Now, just to provide a little bit of context for what is happening in Gettysburg between 1863 and 1868, that 5 years following the battle, the cemetery is dedicated, as I mentioned, in November 1863. The most famous piece that comes out of that is going to be the 272-word address of President Abraham Lincoln, what we know today, of course, as the Gettysburg Address. And Soldiers National Cemetery is, for a time, kind of the only real monument, if you will, of the Battle of Gettysburg. The thousands of soldiers' graves, if you were going to visit the field and pay respect to those soldiers, that is going to be the main way to do so. The thousands of monuments that are scattered over this historic field, they are not yet here by that point in time. The first monument that is going to be begun upon the battlefield at Gettysburg is in 1865. The cornerstone of Soldiers National Monument in the center of the National Cemetery is dedicated on the second anniversary of the battle, July 1st, 1865. It will be Major General Oliver Otis Howard, commander of the Union 11th Corps here at the Battle of Gettysburg, who delivers that keynote address. Howard returning to the hill on which he originally placed United States soldiers on the afternoon of July 1st, 1863. But Soldiers National Monument would not be completed until 1869. And so even at the time of this first Decoration Day in Gettysburg, that memorial is not quite completed. The first finished monument on this battlefield is going to be in the National Cemetery to the men of the 1st Minnesota, and that is dedicated in October 1867 in the shape of a memorial urn. It will take about another decade before we start seeing monuments adorning this battlefield on the outskirts of the National Cemetery, eventually creating the landscape that we have today across this memorial landscape here at what is today Gettysburg National Military Park. Now, as I mentioned, there are many claims for the first Decoration Day, but that first official one takes place in 1868. We can trace a direct line from its commemoration to what we all commemorate annually today. And it is really going to come out of General Orders Number 11, which is written and signed by General John A. Logan, who was at that time, in 1868, the Commander-in-Chief of the Grand Army of the Republic, which had been established in Springfield, Illinois in 1866 and would become the largest and most influential among United States veterans organizations in the aftermath of the Civil War. General Logan had been a congressman from Illinois at the outbreak of the Civil War. Ultimately, he will achieve the rank of Major General during the course of the conflict. He was in command of the 15th Corps after until the death of James McPherson, highest-ranking officer killed during the course of the war, and that will escalate Logan to command of the Army of the Tennessee, in which he succeeded a figure we've already mentioned, General Oliver Howard of Gettysburg fame. Now, by 1868, in command of the Grand Army of the Republic, Logan wants to have this national commemoration of the war dead from the War of the Rebellion, as the Civil War was most famously known at that time. And on May 5th, 1868, he will issue his general orders. And in part, he will say that on the 30th of May, 1868, is designated for the purpose of strewing with flowers or otherwise decorating the graves of comrades who died in defense of their country during the late rebellion, and whose bodies now lie in almost every city, village, and hamlet churchyard in the land. In this observance, said Logan, no form of ceremony is prescribed, but posts of Grand Army of the Republic is what he's referring to by posts, and comrades will, in their own way, arrange such fitting services and testimonials of respect as circumstances may permit. And so essentially he's saying we want to have this national commemoration, but at local levels. Individual veterans, individual communities, individual posts of veterans can really kind of do as they please. He will intentionally leave out former Confederates from this. He says this holiday is solely for United States veterans, by, in his words, cherishing tenderly the memory of our heroic dead who made their breasts a barricade between our country and its foes. He will treat Memorial Day, Decoration Day, as the celebration of emancipation and the denunciation of treason. These are central themes, he said. In his words, these soldiers' lives were the reveille of freedom to a race in chains, and their deaths the tattoo of rebellious tyranny in arms. We should guard their graves with sacred vigilance. He will use this occasion of Decoration Day as a symbolic protection of fallen soldiers' legacies. But that is kind of coupled by a physical, tangible protection of graves by placing flags and flowers and other memorials upon them. He will promote this kind of sense of community for loyal Americans in an effort to really kind of vilify the act of rebellion. He wants to inspire unionism. And keep in mind, this is all happening amid Reconstruction. The consequences of the Civil War are playing out on a national as well as a local stage. And Logan will say at the end of his document, let us then, at the time appointed, gather around sacred remains and garland the passionless mounds above them with the choicest flowers of springtime. He asks that people remember the soldiers and sailors, widows, and orphans as well. And he proposed that this be an annual commemoration held in perpetuity, aided by the news media. He will say it is the purpose of the commander-in-chief, speaking in the third person of himself, to inaugurate this observance with the hope that it will be kept up from year to year. And though the day would change from May 30th to the last Monday of May, it is, of course, still a tradition that Americans commemorate today. Now, also at the national level, William T. Collins, who is the Adjutant General of the Grand Army of the Republic, who appears to have been a Civil War veteran himself, a private in the 16th Kentucky Infantry, makes it very clear that in national cemeteries, and that would include the one here at Gettysburg, where there are several Confederates apparently mistakenly buried, he says that they are the people attending these ceremonies to place Confederate flags upon graves where Confederate soldiers may be buried. He said that in part, the Grand Army of the Republic seeks to honor and preserve the principles for which its members and their dead comrades fought. To keep green the memory of the latter is to make stronger the devotion of those who survive, hence the institution of Memorial Day. Hence, too, the necessity of confining it strictly to the one holy purpose indicated, that of honoring the men who died that the nation might live. We strew flowers, therefore, on the graves of our comrades, and prevent their being strewn in national cemeteries on the graves of rebel dead as they may be buried within. Not because we cherish any feelings of hate or desire to triumph over individual foes, but because we seek to mark in this distinction and manner the feelings with which the nation regards freedom and slavery, loyalty and treason, republican principles, and those of a slave-holding oligarchy. Our refusal to decorate rebel graves, he said, marks no hatred of their occupants or friends, but our undying hostility to the ideas for which they fought and died. Gettysburg, by the spring of 1868, just like the rest of the nation, is 3 years into the period we know as Reconstruction. 1868 is a year fraught with difficulty as well. It is a year that just a couple of months earlier, in February 1868, the impeachment trial of President Andrew Johnson has concluded. It is a year in which July 1868, the passage of the 14th Amendment with its citizenship clause, applying who is an American citizen, largely impacting, of course, the 4 million enslaved people now set free by the work of soldiers on this and other battlefields. And Gettysburg, right before Decoration Day, is going to receive news of a new white supremacist organization. It is warned by their local press of the Ku Klux Klan. On April 28, 1868, in the local press, the Klan is going to be described as a secret organization in the South whose deeds have begun to excite a great deal of alarm among Union people in that region. The object of the association appears to be to annoy, drive off, or murder all Union residents, black and white, and to deter them from voting at the elections for the Reconstruction of the South. They have spread great terror among the blacks and perpetuated very many acts of atrocity and fiendishness among Union whites. George Meade, commanding officer of the Army of the Potomac here at the Battle of Gettysburg and beyond, will issue an order in this same piece that appears in the Gettysburg Star and Sentinel, in which he will say that he cautions all good citizens against having anything to do with the Klan, and threatening, if the members of the order persist in their acts of lawlessness, to retaliate upon them and take blood for blood. It will describe the Klan, will the Star and Sentinel, as having been, quote, conceived and organized by certain Southern conservatives. It is composed of ex-rebel soldiers and has the countenance and support of all leading conservatives, alias Democrats, wherever its objects have become known. And so here in Gettysburg, as they're about to commemorate this annual tradition of honoring war dead for the first time, there is this introduction of a new organization that is wreaking havoc across the post-war South and impacting potentially the people of the North as well. And then also here in Gettysburg, importantly, as one final kind of piece before the Decoration Day festivities begin, is that in 1867, Gettysburg had established a Grand Army of the Republic post of its own, named for Daniel Skelly, a local war hero. This is post number 9 in the town of Gettysburg. Decoration Day is set for Saturday, May 30th, 1868. And the Star and Sentinel would report a few days later under the headline, Honors to the Brave. It said the spirit which prompted the paying of honors to the memory of the dead was speedily caught up by the people everywhere who during the war had sustained the government. In this place, Gettysburg, our people generally cordially united in the movement. Flowers are sent from all over. Flowers come from as far away as Berks County, almost 80 miles northeast of Gettysburg, from a group of school children. They will send some wild flowers from a class belonging to Mr. R.A. Little, according to some of the Gettysburg press. And then in the afternoon of May 30th, at 5 o'clock in the evening, all the stores in Gettysburg are shut down, and there is a procession that will come here along Baltimore Street and eventually enter the National Cemetery at the gate just behind me. After this ceremony is beginning, it will take place at the base of the cornerstone of Soldiers National Monument, as I mentioned, not yet completed. And it will be under the marshalship of a Captain John McCreary. The McCreary family famously lived in the town of Gettysburg. McCreary had a brother, Albertus, who would eventually write a very famous account of the battle years later. This parade will include children of the National Orphans Home, the orphanage for children whose fathers had died during the course of the rebellion. There will be a vehicle draped with an American flag and all these floral tributes, all these flowers. There's a Gettysburg brass band and drum corps, 2 militia units of Zouaves from Gettysburg and Franklin County off to the west. These Zouaves are these local militias led by Captains Norris and Eicholtz. And the paper also describes soldiers of the war and citizens as bringing up kind of the rear of this procession. There will be bells tolling in the streets of Gettysburg from many of the churches in town. And the opening prayer is offered by the Reverend H.C. Grossman, who was the pastor of St. John's Lutheran Church in Hampton, about 16 miles northeast of Gettysburg near the town of New Oxford. The representative of the committee that had organized this all was William Eyster, who will briefly explain the significance of the ceremony, and then he recites this poetic passage. Eyster is a graduate of Pennsylvania College. He is a 100-day cavalry veteran of the war. He'd been in a cavalry unit basically raised for emergency purposes in 1864. And he will deliver or recite a poem which had been written by James Gates Percival, who was a Connecticut poet who lived in the late 18th, early 19th centuries and wrote this poem called The Graves of the Patriots about Revolutionary War dead. And here it will be on this battlefield of what many called the Second American Revolution that he's going to recite these words here at the Gettysburg Cemetery. In part, he will say of this poem that the joy with which children tread hallowed ground, that holds venerated bodies of soldiers. He says that these monuments, meaning graves, are more lasting than the shrines which have been reared to the kings and demigods of old. Their monuments, their graves, their battlefield, he says, more lasting than any monument that could be possibly built here. And then the keynote address that day is going to be delivered by the Reverend Dr. James Allen Brown, who had succeeded Samuel Simon Schmucker as now the second president of the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Gettysburg. He had been inaugurated into that position in 1864. He had previously spoken in Gettysburg on Easter Sunday, 1865, which was the day after Abraham Lincoln died on that Easter weekend. He's going to give a brief speech, just about 500 words. And just to give you a taste of what he said in part, he delivered this to the audience. He said, "We have come to do honor to the noble dead, to strew with flowers the graves of those who died, that we and the nation might live. We have not come in midwinter or with cypress wreaths, but in springtime, when the fields are green and the flowers blooming and birds singing, that in sympathy with universal nature, we might bring our grateful offering of reverence and affection." He looked back to 7 years earlier, in 1861, when, as he said, hundreds of thousands who now sleep in soldiers' graves were pursuing peaceful avocations at home. And of course, he's talking about the beginning of the American Civil War. But he said, when their country called, they left home and loved ones to uphold their country's flag and their country's honor. He said, it is on occasions like this, at cemeteries like Gettysburg, that we heartily bade farewell to these men who left these children, who left these families at home, to go fight on battlefields like here at Gettysburg. He says, here on this hill, they met the hosts of rebellion and treason, and here thousands laid down their lives for freedom and for union. The price of their death was victory and safety for us and the nation. The pledge is given to the noble soldiers of the Union we have now come to fulfill, to keep alive their mourners and strew with flowers their graves. Their orphan children, the representatives of 500,000, would strew these flowers upon the graves of their fathers, and the nation would recognize them as their own. The noble dead, said Brown, who fell here and on the neighboring hills, need no eulogium from our lips. They have secured the proudest of all earthly honors, and their tombstones bear the inscription, they died for their country. He says there's no danger that these men will be forgotten. The act of remembering on Decoration Day, on Memorial Day, will keep that in perpetuity through the years. Not only soldiers and comrades in arms will visit, he says, but statesmen and patriots, gray hairs and tender youth, young men and maidens come and will continue to come. He talks about people coming from as close as Harrisburg, the Pennsylvania state capital, but also from farther states. He says they come here to this shrine of freedom and liberty where their sons and brothers fell and now sleep. And he will end with a bit of poetry of his own. Strew flowers, sweet flowers on the soldiers' graves. For the death they died, the nation saves. 'Tis sweet and glorious thus to die. Hallowed the spot where their ashes lie. And after Reverend Brown speaks, the closing benediction is given by the Reverend Dr. Edsel Ferrier, who is a professor of English and literature at Pennsylvania College, now Gettysburg College. Children from the orphans' home just down Baltimore Street are going to now decorate the graves with wreaths and these flowers and flags. Band will play national airs and patriotic tunes. There's a 22-gun salute from local militia, Zouaves, one for each block of graves in the National Cemetery. And through that evening, music and poetry is going to be delivered by local musicians, pastors, professors, poets, and veterans. And by the end of the day, says the Star and Sentinel, the scene at that moment was inspiring. The mellow rays of the setting sun bathed Cemetery Hill in a flood of golden light. The chanting of the orphans mingled with the music of the band, broken by the occasional booming of cannon, while over 2,000 people, drawn together by the common impulse of doing honor to the patriot dead, looked on, all returning, as we trust, with a truer appreciation of the debt of obligation the nation owes to its fallen heroes. The entire ceremony was fitting tribute to the immortal dead, and we hope to see it repeated year to year. And finally, the Gettysburg Compiler, another more conservative editorial than the Star and Sentinel was. But the Compiler and the Star and Sentinel, in a rare occasion, are on the same side in recognizing the significance of this moment. And the Compiler would say that the commanding location of Cemetery Hill, the balmy breeze of that evening, and the setting sun, the touching ceremony, and the funeral-like order in that immense audience conspire to make the scene peculiarly impressive. And so it would be that on May 30th, 1868, here at Gettysburg and across the United States, a national tradition was born, one which we commemorate still to this day at Gettysburg and beyond. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Beyond the Ridge. I invite you to tune in for subsequent entries of Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center's web series, bringing you interesting stories and interpretations of race, religion, medicine, and war from the 19th century and beyond. My name is Cody Aish. We'll see you next time. Thank you.